Microsoft 365, or whatever they're calling it these days, is one of, if not the most successful software products in history. It's ubiquitous. I wrote this script in Word. What's a consultant if not a PowerPoint concierge? Corporate finance teams all across the world would cease to exist without Excel. They even have a world championship. And that doesn't include most of the subscription package. I could try to list everything you get with Microsoft 365, but my editor told me to keep this video under 10 hours. I'll say at a high level that over the years, the service has grown to include the standard Office applications, the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, which includes Intune and the product formerly known as Azure Active Directory, and the Windows operating system and its attendant products as well. It's a big deal. So where did it come from? Office 365, which later became Microsoft 365, launched way back in 2010 with some big promises.
I think it's a great opportunity for the customer. It's win-win from a business model perspective. Customers no longer are buying the servers to support these applications. The customers don't have to operate them. So we get a chance both to extend our footprint and our business opportunity and save the customers money.
Whether customers have saved money or not, well, that might be tough to say. Microsoft certainly made money, though. They don't break out revenue by product exactly, but their productivity business is growing like the list of repairs on a used German car. In 2024, they made $77 billion in revenue in their Productivity and Business Processes segment and reported that their Office commercial products revenue increased almost $6 billion that year as well as more customers shifted to the cloud. Ballmer was right about that. You can't get away from Microsoft 365, but it's not like Call of Duty, which they also own. It takes a lot of thought and planning to buy the right license tier, turn on the right stuff, configure it properly, and support it. It's also confusing. They changed the names of the services left and right. Azure Active Directory is now Entra ID. The Microsoft 365 app is now Microsoft 365 Copilot, even if Copilot isn't available in your region. There are government subscriptions and education subscriptions and a nonprofit pricing tier. The whole thing is just mind-bogglingly complex. And even after wading through all that, users might prefer to keep emailing documents back and forth. OneDrive is a shockingly hard sell sometimes. So what's an IT professional to do? We want to help you untangle this mess in a way that doesn't leave you PowerShell shocked. We're leaving that in. I don't care what you guys say. While your users might not thank you directly, they'll be happy. Deep down. It's like plumbing. Nobody thinks about it until it doesn't work. Okay, so as you embark on this journey, you should keep a few things in mind. First, I want you to think like an end user. Become one with your users and recognize that most Microsoft 365 services fall into one of three buckets. They help users be productive, like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. They help users manage content, like SharePoint and OneDrive. Or they help users collaborate, like Teams and Tasks. Gather requirements, understand how Microsoft 365 fits into your ecosystem, and articulate it. Are you trying to make cross-departmental collaboration easier? Do you want to share files securely? Put yourself in the shoes of your end users and decision makers and ask yourself, what can Microsoft 365 do for me? Once you know what you want, it's time to turn your abstract wishes into concrete reality. This is complicated and ever-changing, but the general idea is that every time you decide to tweak a control, it should cascade from a broader goal. Your company might want to improve efficiency. From that, it follows that your users want to be able to find things. Maybe Microsoft 365 can help. As the one with the console, you have the power to make a series of decisions like team expiration to clean up your tenant, or disabling attachments in Exchange to make it easier to centrally manage files, or requiring permissions to create a new Microsoft 365 group. Remember, don't be arbitrary. Nobody likes arbitrary. You're an IT professional, not Lord Farquaad. A final insight. Default towards the less restrictive. You paid a lot for this thing. It probably didn't come in a box, but you paid a lot for it, so you should use it. The number of times I've talked to an IT director who's convinced that they need to turn off every Microsoft service is, frankly, staggering. I'm talking limiting OneDrive storage to what users used to have on file shares, turning off Teams because users were creating new groups and collaborating unapprovedly, and trying to hang as far back in the update cycle as possible. The goal should never be to buy a new tool and then replicate your old environment as closely as possible with it. That's like buying a Ferrari and driving your Civic around town because the guy at Jiffy Lube won't change the oil in a sports car. Why even bother? If you're not going to use it as intended, you might as well just toss it. I'm joined today by practice lead John Annan from our technical counselor program. John's going to talk us through some of the machinations of a governed Microsoft 365 project. Welcome, John.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks for having me.
So, Microsoft 365 has been around in various forms for quite some time.
Microsoft Business Productivity Office Suite, you mean, from almost 20 years ago? It has.
So, why are we still talking about it? It's 2025. Why are people still having trouble with this ubiquitous software?
Couple of reasons. One, Microsoft is constantly iterating on Office 365 or Microsoft 365 now. It's not the same product it was when I first started dealing with it as a Microsoft reseller all those many, many years ago. The second reason would be that it's very hard to do right. In order to get Microsoft adoption in a general purpose productivity office suite, you have to change the behavior of an awful lot of non-IT people. That's the whole benefit of a productivity software, is it's going to be generally applicable to 95% of the knowledge workers in your organization. And getting anyone to change those behaviors is very, very hard. Even the simplest extent of trying to get people to use OneDrive to share documents for collaborative editing rather than emailing them back and forth with different versioning numbers is a bar that's too high for lots of organizations that we talk to still clear.
So, it's hard to do right. So, a question for you, John, is what do those who do it right do differently? What makes it special?
To do it right, you do have to be ambitious. So that's a good thing. In a lot of cases, ambition is anathema to IT projects. You want to make sure, if you look at the DevOps framework, everything is supposed to be in minimum viable products and 2-week sprints, and it's the art of the possible. There's something to be said for dreaming big with something like M365 because it is so all-encompassing. So you want to have a vision that's grandiose, that's going to actually deliver on the value for all the pain of the organizational change and the very non-trivial cost. Right? Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365, $25 to $50 per user now, depending on whether or not you get those Copilot add-ons or some of the security add-ons. It's a significant investment. Companies and enterprises that are doing it right, we find, are the ones that have a large vision that they're trying to execute against. It keeps them on a pathway despite all the challenges and all the little missteps that they're inevitably going to encounter.
What do the ones that do it poorly do differently? What does a bad implementation or governance program look like?
Well, so a bad adoption of M365 is one that has insufficient governance. And notice I didn't say too much or too little. I just said insufficient. There has to be direction. There has to be some control rods for an M365 implementation in order to get it to work at all. Too much governance and you're not going to get adoption and you're not going to get the end users trying to figure out new solutions to their own problems. They're going to fall back into those reflexive ways of expecting IT to hand them a full-blown solution. That's never going to work, right? Too little governance, and you're going to have the problem of all the different organizations running meetings in different ways, all the different departments and subunits of your company deciding that we're going to, create our own Power Apps, our own custom software, when in reality, all you should be reusing software that somebody else in your company already built for you. So the companies that do it right manage that too much governance, too little governance, and they hit that sort of sweet spot where they're able to enable users, still allow creativity, but prevent cost overruns, prevent duplication of effort, and prevent, obviously, security breaches or data exfiltration.
So what's an example of a duplication of effort that you've seen that you found to be silly or outrageous or just plain inefficient?
Well, the best example is still with Excel and Power Apps and sort of the data science that goes along with that. The running joke for years has been that a finance department runs more on Excel than it does on their actual ERP system, and that in a lot of cases is true. There's still tons of data analysis work that happens in spreadsheets and in Microsoft Power BI rather than in the native system that houses that financial data or that transactional data. So companies that do it wrong, companies that begin to fail, will spin up what we used to call shadow IT teams to build all of these Power Apps, to build all these analysis tools and framework, when it'd be much better if the HR people could talk to the sales people, could talk to the marketing people, could talk to the product people for product A, B, or C, because they're all running similar analyses on data, but they've custom built all those apps or all those Excel frameworks or Excel tools rather than just cutting and pasting from their neighbors.
Okay, but I don't I'm not the boss of them, for lack of a better word, right? The finance team can do what the finance team wants to do. The engineering team can do what the engineering team wants to do. People are empowered to do whatever they want. So how do I, as an IT leader, get you to stop building ridiculously complicated Excel spreadsheets or using an Access database or something like that? What can I do from a governance perspective to fix that?
By acknowledging the fact that it's not the IT leader whose job it is to play traffic cop. The IT leader in the modern environment, the cloud environment where self-service is at the core of a product offering, is there more as guide and mentor. So away from dictatorial sort of ITIL traditional frameworks of thou must, thou shalt, cannot, more to what's the community of practice? What's the IT leader doing to ensure that the different stakeholders that are using this M365 product, what's that IT leader doing to make sure that they can collaborate successfully together? The IT leader is not the expert in inter-office collaboration. I'm not sure if people realize that, but because you're a VP of infrastructure and operations doesn't actually give you firsthand expert knowledge on how to run an effective meeting, but they're looked at for that. The better answer is to get 8 or 9 teams to run their meetings, find out what works, share those together in a community of practice, and then let the entire enterprise, the entire company, take advantage of what is being learned.
So what are the really good CIOs and other IT leaders doing to actually get people to the table? Because this sounds pretty simple to me, just get everyone to agree. But I think pretty much all of human history is colored with instances that could have been solved by just getting people to agree. So how do we fix it in this case?
Part of it's around empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it's around that plea for collaboration. There is a principle of, I'll say, selfishness or laziness that you want to appeal to in people. There are very few people who want to do things absolutely from scratch, and I'm one of them. I'll put myself in that group. So if anyone feels offended by what I'm saying, I'm painting myself with this same brush. I would much rather take something that is somewhat baked and customize it to my exact needs than build it myself from scratch. If somebody could show me a repository of meeting templates where I've already got a loop component for the agenda, I've already got questionnaires and feedbacks and activities to do breakout rooms, I'd much rather take that and import it, make a small adjustment to the color scheme because I like cerulean blue just like the next person, or the logo. I'd much rather take that and implement it rather than build it all from scratch. Successful CIOs or successful infrastructure and operations leaders, because they're the ones that get tasked with this, is not at the CIO level, they're making that appeal to selfishness. Don't bother trying to figure it all on yourself. Look, we have this repository of good templates, of good practices. We have this community that you can go ask questions of, and they'll be responsive and give you useful answers.
So I think the only shade of blue that Microsoft tolerates is Azure, by the way. For
Azure, yes. Yeah.
Well, it does mean blue. It does mean blue, John. So this is an interesting path that you're taking us down. Right. I'm very curious about this. And you're sort of alluding to different customizations and different types of governance, maybe that different organizations, companies, entities, private sector, public sector, whatever, can employ. What are some examples of some of the steps that you've seen people take to make their Microsoft 365 footprint look like something that fits them, not just generic?
Microsoft does a good job of allowing you to select pre-configured frameworks for your absolute must-have controls. And that's a great thing. The last thing I certainly, as an infrastructure and operations professional in a former life, really ever wanted to do, even my friends that are still in security, I think the last thing they want to do is be parsing through the latest GDPR legislation to find out exactly what nerd knob they have to turn to what setting in the Microsoft admin console. Microsoft makes it very easy to identify yourself as a organization that has to be HIPAA compliant, an organization that deals with PII, an organization that needs to be PCI compliant because you're dealing with credit card data. Microsoft makes it very easy for your company to self-identify and pick the templates that are appropriate to you. Layer enough of those templates on it, and you could call that a customization. And that's the right way to customize any off-the-shelf, any COTS or most SaaS platforms, because Microsoft, as I said, is constantly iterating on these platforms. They'll be making changes to the platform. Ideally, you want them to make the change and it will respect the HIPAA legislation rather than you having to go back and reinstitute your HIPAA compliance framework that you custom built into Microsoft. The shorter answer to your question, what are companies doing to successfully customize Microsoft Office to their need, is that they are avoiding customizing it as much as possible, instead layering Microsoft templates on top of each other to hit that customization goal.
So there's a couple of big flagship services, let's call them, that are bundled in with Microsoft 365. So it's three pillars, right? You've got Office, right? The Office suite that we're familiar with. You've got enterprise mobility and security. So that'll be things like Intune and Entra, as they're calling it now. And then, of course, there's the operating system side. So Microsoft 365 is really big, and there's a couple of these flagship services. So for something like Teams, for example, which I know a lot of folks who've deployed have struggled with, what are some things that they should watch out for as they're governing their deployment?
Teams comes with a directed opinion on how to run collaboration. There's a reason why a channel is different than a team. There's a reason why a conversation is different than a channel. There's reasons why there are different chats in meetings, in standing meetings, in one-on-ones, in group chats, chats within teams. These all have different constructs. Organizations that fail at Microsoft 365 adoption, and I use fail in the loosest sense of the word, organizations that aren't as successful end up in that situation because they're using these constructs in ways that they weren't really intended for. And that's usually a problem where the users don't know any better. They just jump into it and they think it's like their favorite Reddit forum. They think it's like their favorite Facebook forum. They think it's like a Slack that they liked using because they were in the software development side of the house. These are all a little different. And knowing how they map to what Microsoft Teams envisioned for how you collaborate is really important if you're going to get the most out of it. It's not to say that you won't collaborate, it's just you might not collaborate effectively or well. A great specific example of this is when people have a standing or an ad hoc meeting that turns into a recurring meeting. You've got a series of chats and people are putting interesting information in the chat, contextual information about the speaker, little jokes back and forth. Sometimes they're sharing work product inside of that chat. What happens if that meeting goes away or gets deleted or gets moved? What happens when the owner of that meeting changes? Well, meetings don't really have owners as an object inside of the M365 frameworks. Teams do. So if the meeting was associated in a team, then you can change owners and retain that. If I just sent you an Outlook invite to a random group of people that I put into a two, and then I leave the company or get promoted, all that history can go away, or at least can be a lot harder to find for continuity of operations. So that's where companies that are successful are leaning into the initial assumptions that Microsoft had around what collaboration is going to be like.
So Microsoft has a vision, and they have sort of an architecture for information in Microsoft 365, and you have to, or you should anyway, conform to that if you're going to get the best results.
If you're going to get the best results, for sure. I mean, again, age-old advice from from commercial off-the-shelf software: customize if necessary, but don't customize.
So there's a couple of services that I hear a lot about, and there's an ongoing debate in the very fun and interesting communities that I hang out in, John.
You have to pick better communities to hang out in, Jeremy.
Well, the question that they have for me that I can't answer effectively is, what's the difference between SharePoint and Teams? I have a file. Where do I put it?
Decoding Microsoft's vision around collaboration is an art form more than a science. If you get the chance to go to Ignite, you will hear lots of Microsoft professionals speak about what their vision are, and they do look at these products very, very separately, which is frustrating because on the architecture side, and again, you got to remember that's where I come from as a former practitioner, you can actually trace back and find out where the original source of the data is. Teams is best thought of, in my opinion, as an overlay to a bunch of other services. And that's also not entirely true because it is beginning to grow and morph. And like I said, Microsoft is constantly iterating on these things. SharePoint is a structured web-based content management system in a more formal IT-controlled, traditional IT-controlled way than Microsoft Teams. There is an awful lot of overlapping capabilities between the two products. If I had to be prescriptive about it, I would say that SharePoint is designed for a truly externalized audience, whereas you can build a web page, you can control access to that web page, is essentially announced to the world. Teams is, again, a Teams construct. You have to be invited to a team. It's a little bit more of a closed loop. on the team. So while there still can be an awful lot of customizations of the team's page, if you look at the back-end architecture, you're going to find that's just a SharePoint site in and of itself. It's a SharePoint site that hopefully has less configurability and less complexity so that an average business user and not a SharePoint engineer is required to set it up and maintain it. SharePoint has lots of additional capabilities around publishing content externally, allowing access and version control in a much more comprehensive way than sort of OneDrive. Although again, even those features are really overlapping. It's more about setting up a workflow for approvals and controls, right? So SharePoint, certainly, if you look at a Venn diagram, SharePoint would be the whole set of collaboration capabilities. Teams would be a very close underlap of that and probably has an edge or two that's going over what SharePoint can do.
Now, what about OneDrive?
OneDrive is best thought of as a junk drawer for the individual user. Much like your kitchen junk drawer, it's got a bunch of different things. It is very useful for the individual to store and organize their thoughts in their own particularly creative way. It is a less than ideal solution for teams to collaborate together, sharing things out of an individual's OneDrive. You end up very much with a problem of what happens if that individual leaves the organization or goes on to a different role. You don't want business critical documentation, business critical files stored in somebody's OneDrive account when they leave.
So should your governance guide users as to where they should place their files, how they should interact with these tools?
Very much so, yes. You want to give the kind of prescriptive guidance that allows the right pathway to be the easiest pathway for the end user. You don't want to bludgeon them to death with rules and regulations. You want to present them the easy path and make it so consumable that they would have to go through extraordinary effort to take a different path. That's your job as an INO, as an IT leader when it comes to M365 adoption.
Who should be doing this? What's your responsibility as a leader? What's your team's responsibility? What sort of expert skills do you need to make this work? And then what do you need your stakeholders outside of IT to do?
The most important part of that question is the last one, the last element that you had. What's the expectation of the stakeholders? M365, cloud technologies in general, are an upending of the traditional model. And I mean, by traditional, I mean the 1990s, maybe the 2000s. All cloud services are self-service at its core. There's 5 fundamental characteristics about being in the cloud. That's a definitional thing. It's from the NIST standards. Self-service is one of them. It is no longer reasonable for an end user to be able to call up the help desk and say, I need help with a mail merge. I need help with a pivot table. That's not something that IT help desk does anymore. Getting end users and other third-party stakeholders to recognize that is the hardest job of an IT leader and their team, because they need buy-in to that, because there's 10,000 end users and only 200 people in that IT team. So they're outnumbered. They need the end users to take accountability and responsibility for learning how to use the system in ways that IT is never going to imagine. That being said, it is the job of the IT leader and the IT team to make that environment safe. I'm not going to tell you what you build in the sandbox. I'm not going to tell you if you're going to build a castle with a moat, or you're going to build a forest, or if you're going to build a desert savanna or a golf course, or whatever your SimCity builder wants to do in their sandbox. I am, however, going to make sure that you can't accidentally share sensitive information as long as it's labeled properly with the outside world. I am going to make sure that you can't accidentally delete your neighbor's Power applications, even though you can change yours till the cows come home. That's my job as an IT leader, is to give that direction to my team. My team's job is then to turn all those nerd knobs in the Microsoft Purview console and the Microsoft Administrative console to make that environment safe.
So we've gone this whole interview so far without mentioning it. I'm going to do it now, and that is AI. Microsoft has launched Copilot, and they branded everything Copilot. You can download the Microsoft Copilot app. You can buy a Copilot Plus PC. You're prompted to use Copilot every time you open a Word document in Microsoft 365 if you've got the right license. How does this figure in? Does it change the governance game at all?
It would amplify the need for some of those elements of governance, especially around making the environment safe. The biggest fear that I'm talking to IT leaders or infrastructure and operation leaders about when they're going into Copilot or trying to understand what they're going to get for their extra $25 or $30 a month is what happens if there's a data leak? What happens if all of a sudden you put in a query and what comes back is how much money the CEO makes? Nobody wants that. In government organizations, nobody wants, the front page exposure of a query went in and somebody's personal tax records got returned back. With that sort of governance is absolutely critical for the successful adoption of Copilot features to make users comfortable in using them. The adoption of whether or not they deliver any business value, a lot of that is going to be driven by those communities of practice to find out what Copilot is really good at and good for. Meeting summarization, 100%. Text document summarization, rather than read 800 pages of text, I can have it summarized in a 2-page note. That's absolutely excellent. Are we really getting more effective meetings because somebody is writing the minutes? Maybe, but if nobody reads the minutes, which is usually the problem anyway, it's not really going to help us. Is our customer service more effective because the agents using the customer service can use Copilot to help write an email that's responding to a complaint from a taxpayer or a customer? Again, the reasonable IT leader is going to try to put as many metrics in place to actually measure the value of those outcomes. Because right now, I think they're pretty shaky.
You're in an elevator with a senior executive. They're telling you that they're looking to hire a very lucrative job, and you would just fit in perfectly. However, they need some advice on their M365 implementation. What do you tell them in that elevator?
I would tell them that M365 is a whole enterprise operation, a whole company effort. M365 is a reimagining of the way unstructured knowledge work gets done. That is not something that is to be undertaken lightly. It's something that, in order to deliver the biggest bang for the buck, has to be done deliberately. So that means it's not just an IT project. That means if that executive who wants to offer me the really lucrative paycheck wants me to be successful, that means I need to be talking to and being helped by a lot of other stakeholders in the company.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Jeremy.
This sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's manageable, I promise. If you have a week, you can get through our program to govern Microsoft 365 in a few easy steps. You ready? First step, you're going to define your goals. What are you trying to do? Are you growing? Are you focused on efficiency? Are you reducing risk? How can Microsoft 365 help you do those things? You need to define the expected outcome so you can get where you want to go. Second, you've got to figure out your priorities for governance. We want to generate an overall philosophy for governance to help bridge the gap between our business goals, which are not often expressed in software configuration terms, and the specific hard and soft controls that we're going to capture in the admin center and in written policies. Third, we're going to map controls for the key services, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, and define policy statements that reflect our governance priorities and our organization's goals. Finally, we'll build a communication plan that includes one-pagers for critical services because none of this stuff is worth it if nobody knows or cares. Again, it sounds like a lot, but it is doable. If you'd like to know more, you can find the full blueprint at infotech.com. Someone like John will be happy to talk you through the governance process and get you where you need to go.